has written an excellent book called Shaping Our Nation, How Surges of Migration Transformed America and Its Politics. Michael, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's good to be with you, and nothing wrong with calling somebody Seward. William H. Seward was one of our greatest secretaries of state.
Maybe that's what I was thinking of, Lauren.
That's what you were thinking. Mr. Barone, when I told my husband that you were going to be one of our guests, he almost melted in the floor. He was like, Michael Barone, oh my goodness. I mean, he just is so impressed with your knowledge and your upbringing. And I told Ed, I said, my husband has sent me like 20 questions to ask him on my text.
Yes.
So I'm trying to be
20
mindful.
20 minutes.
Because he thinks I use words good.
You use words good. Well, let me ask you this. This book, and I've read some other stuff that you've written on this subject, including a Wall Street Journal article that you wrote not too long ago.
Yeah.
We hear this. So I want to start off with a general question, because we hear lots of griping, lots of anger, and see lots of hand wringing. So a lot of anxiety about immigration, especially Hispanic immigration. I think that's the main area of concern for a lot of people. But when it comes overall to the subject of immigration and America's future, are you hopeful or pessimistic?
Well, I'm hopeful, basically. I mean, if you look over the long run of American history, past 400 years, this continent was mostly vacant. 400 years ago, we had a small Native American population out of touch with civilizations worthy of respectful attention, but out of touch with the rest of the world, and by no means the most advanced part of the globe. And now we've got, the number one nation in the world. And it's been peopled in very large part by surges of migration. When you look at those demographics, what you see is that the very large numbers of people either move from other places to the United States, immigration, or move internally from one part of what is now the United States to another, internal migration. And those surges, those very large numbers, typically they happen, nobody predicts them. Nobody predicts when they start. They last just one or two generations, not eternally. And then usually unexpectedly they just stop. And that's been a history of how America has been settled. It's how we've become such a strong and successful nation. They've also caused tensions and conflicts with new peoples coming in, and the eternal problem of how you have a unified civic culture with a country that is diverse, or to use the au courant term these days, multicultural. We've always been multicultural from the days of the British North American colonies, when you had Anglican Virginia, Puritan Massachusetts, Quaker Pennsylvania, Dutch Reform New York. We've always had that. We have a template that the Founding Fathers gave us that has tended to work: limited government, individual rights, rule of law, in national loyalty. That has tended to work, but it's been strained sometimes over the course of the years.
Michael, let me ask you this. Now, I mentioned earlier in the program that we're having you on, so I discussed this just briefly with Lauren. But my dad's Italian. I'm fourth generation. My mom came over to this country from Greece when she was a little girl with her family. And so I was telling our listeners.
I almost want to say, where did they start a restaurant?
Well, in my mother's kitchen. Let me tell you, she could cook both. She could cook anything. She was a fantastic cook as well as a wonderful person. But when we went to visit my mom's family in Lowell, Massachusetts, it was a Greek neighborhood. This is where a lot of Greeks came. Once they came into the country, they settled in different Greek neighborhoods.
Well, that's where Senator and presidential candidate Paul Tsongas, Greek
That's right.
family from Lowell, Mass. Yep.
Lowell, Massachusetts. I can remember going to the corner store, leaving my yaya's house, and everyone spoke Greek in the store. You heard Greek music on the radio. You heard people yelling at each other in Greek. Everybody spoke Greek. I didn't have a problem with hearing that. In other words, they could speak broken English. You could communicate. Some people get upset because they want Hispanics to learn English. So here's my question. I wasn't worried about people speaking Greek. I'm not really worried about people speaking Spanish in America. But my mom's family had an ocean between the United States and Greece. There was no easy way to go back there. How do Hispanics assimilate into American culture if all they have to do is cross a border? Is that a major difference?
I think it's a minor difference. I think it's a difference. I think if, the group of people that I call the Ellis Islander immigrants from the time that the Ellis Island Immigration Station opened in 1892, and we got, coincidentally, a sudden shift of immigration it had been from northern Western Europe, Irish, Catholics, Germans, Scandinavians, Brits. It switched to Eastern and Southern Europe, Southern Italians, Greeks, Poles, Jews, and so forth from the multi-ethnic Russian and Austro-Hungarian empires and the Ottoman Empire and so forth. And they came over. They had been second-class citizens in most cases in the place of where they came from, and one of the attractions of the United States was the sense of moral equality of citizenship here and of equal rights, and I think that had a big attraction. The civic institutions of the United States, the elites of a century ago, did a good job of what Theodore Roosevelt called Americanization. You had Henry Ford set up citizenship classes for the factory workers and taught people to speak English, and the public schools did a good job of inculcating the English language. There were still ties with the foreign countries. People from southern Italy and Greece, many of them actually went back to their homelands. There were foreign language newspapers. The ships went back and forth. They weren't totally isolated and never returned, as we sometimes think. But I think the major difference today is that, number one, Hispanic immigrants, people with Spanish language backgrounds, are a larger share of the immigration than any single language group was during the Ellis Island period, which ended abruptly with the outbreak of World War I in 1914 and then the restrictive immigration law of 1924. There are larger groups speaking a same language, although there are variations in regional accents in Spanish that have some significance. The land border does provide somewhat easier back and forth, although as we increase and improve border enforcement, one of the things we've seen is that you get more Hispanics, including illegals as well as legal immigrants, remaining, particularly illegals, remaining in the United States because they don't want to take a chance of not being able to come back in. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of a perverse way we're working. I think the elites have been less good at teaching Americanization, at emphasizing the need to learn the English language so you can work your way upward within our English language, predominantly speaking society. The people in some ways have been better than the elites. I mean, in California in the 1990s, you had, people were giving Spanish language instruction in schools all the way through high school, and you had academic experts that said this was the right thing to do in a multicultural society. When the voters got their hands on this issue in 1998, and this is liberal California, they voted for 1 year of English language foreign language instruction, and that has improved a lot of Hispanics in California as a result of that going into effect over the last 15 years. So I think we failed to take to heart some of the lessons of the Ellis Islander period of 100 years ago and have not done as good a job. Nonetheless, Hispanics are learning English. They have moved up. I think that the degree of assimilation and upward mobility has been a little disappointing in my view. A dozen years ago, I thought it would be higher. But on the other hand, it's much, much better than if you compare some of the immigration groups to countries in Europe.
Mr. Barone, how does this affect the basic American? People that are hearing about this book, they're like, why do I need this information? How is migration affect me? I mean, is it in the long haul going to make a difference in the political landscape, short and long term?
I think it tells us how we've become what we are and gives us a sense that dealing with so-called multiculturalism, dealing with people who come from different backgrounds, have different values, is not something new in American history, but something that we've been grappling with, mostly successfully, for more than 200 years. I mean, we go back in the book, Shaping Our Nation, the first surge of migration that we look at is the Scots-Irish in the dozen years before the American Revolution. In a sense, this was immigration from abroad, from Northern Ireland, Lowland Scotland. It was also internal migration from one fringe of the British Empire to another. These people were fighting peoples. They'd had traditions of multiple battles and internecine warfare in Scotland and Ireland. They went to the frontier in America. The Quakers in Philadelphia were very happy to send them on their way to the mountains of western Pennsylvania, and they went down the Appalachian chain to the Shenandoah Valley, to the Carolinas, over the mountains into Kentucky and Tennessee, and kept pressing outward under their leader, Andrew Jackson, clearing the Indians out of the southeast, beating the British in New Orleans, basically taking over Florida from the Spanish, in which Jackson played an important part, and ultimately in the acquisition of Texas, annexation of Texas, and through the Mexican War, the acquisition of California. And that's a culture that still exists. I mean, if you look at the Census Bureau asks people to describe their descent, their descent in their own terms. And so, majority of people in Iowa and Wisconsin say German. If you look at the counties where the most common response is American, it's those Scots-Irish. And just like Jackson, who was born just 2 years after his parents left Northern Ireland, he did not consider himself British or Irish or Scots or anything of the sort. He was an American. And you've always had high degrees of voluntary participation in the military from the Scots-Irish and their descendants along that Appalachian chain and going southwest. This is part of the American character. It shows up in voting behavior. This is a group that has not voted for President Obama. I think they see him as a sort of professorial, semi-pacifist sort of figure that's not alien with them. Some people say, well, they won't vote for him because he's black. The Scots-Irish in Southwest Virginia voted back in 1989 for Governor Douglas Wilder, a black Democrat. They didn't have any problem with black people. They have a particular problem with Barack Obama.
It's funny you're talking about the self-labeling as American. I'm from the Boston area. I grew up in Nashua, New Hampshire. My wife is from Mississippi, and I when we first started dating, I asked her. I said, "Well, what's your nationality?" Because growing,
it's a wonder you could communicate. Really,
well, I still had the Pak the Ka accent, but whenever the few times I dated, let me just say that growing up. You always asked about nationality. When I asked my wife, I said, "So what nationality are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm American."
I'm American.
American. And I said, "No, I mean, where are your parents from?" And she said, "The South." And
she didn't understand that. Nobody comes from here.
No, she, and to this day, we don't know. I am half Italian, half Greek. That was a big part of my self-identity. She's American.
She needs to get on Ancestry.com or something.
That's fascinating.
Well, that's an illustration of the pattern that I'm saying. And Massachusetts and Mississippi have not always been the closest of friends. I mean, two of the internal migrations I talk about are in the early Republic in the 19th century. You have the New England Yankees, who had been pent up for nearly 200 years in the New England colonies by the French in Quebec and the British Iroquois Alliance in New York. They suddenly move westward. Upstate New York becomes a Yankee province. Northeast Ohio, the Connecticut Reserve, a very New England air. Southern Michigan, Chicago. And they champion all sorts of reforms, considered crazy by some people in their times. Women's rights, temperance, prohibition of alcohol, and abolition of slavery. And then at the same time, you have the southern plantation grandees from Virginia and the Atlantic seaboard taking themselves and their very large number of slaves from that Atlantic seaboard to the Mississippi Valley, to the Cotton Kingdom. They want to expand the Cotton Kingdom westward. The New England Yankees want to expand the zone of freedom from slavery westward. And you get the conflict out of that becomes the Civil War. So that was one occasion when cultural conflict in the United States led to open and terrible warfare over differences on a very important moral issue.
So a lot of this is understanding who we are. and how we got to this place, because I think what you're saying is true, that a lot of people don't know their history and their roots, and to understand, I guess, other people, where they came from. I lived in Los Angeles for a long time, so you all can imagine coming from the Deep South, where I guess most of us, you're either Caucasian or African American for the most part growing up, and then moving to Los Angeles, where you have all different sorts of people. And if you went to one area near where I taught at Azusa Pacific, it was a big Asian community, just like you said. And was it New York?
No,
You know,
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, sorry.
New Hampshire.
And, they function right there together.
Yeah.
And then you have the Hispanic communities, and, they function together. And most people that I crossed paths with in Los Angeles that were Hispanic really did not have a strong grasp on the English language.
Yeah. Well, that's true in many cases. Second and third generations do better. You do have large parts. You've got 4 million people of Hispanic background in Los Angeles County, so that's a pretty big mass, and obviously they're shopping districts and places that you don't really have to speak any language other than Spanish to get along in daily life. So that does present a challenge for us in terms of assimilation and enabling people and their children to get the tools that they need to take advantage of America and to contribute maximally from their talents and abilities to do it. You mentioned the Asians. One of the things that, we've had this huge Latin and Asian migration over the last 3 or 4 decades in the United States. It wasn't predicted. When they changed the immigration laws in 1965, experts were asked if we would get significant immigration from Latin America and Asia, and they said no. They said immigrants come from Europe. Well, they had in the past, but obviously in the future you saw something working very differently.